Hey, Joe.
Hi, Lucky. How you doing?
Yeah, good. Can you hear me okay? Is my sound good?
Sound is good. Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yep. All good.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah, it might be a little bit hard to see everyone there. I'm just going to make it full screen, actually. Bit of a sunset behind us. Bit cloudy out there, but anyway, you might be able to make out some faces there.
I can. Thank you for taking the time to watch it, everybody. I'm flattered that you would want to show this, Lucky, and thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's brilliant. And I guess I've got a few people in the room, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. There's probably about 12 of us here. This is the our Surf Coast Bitcoin meetup, and we get together once a month. And I watched your video, I don't know, maybe a couple of weeks ago, obviously when it came out, and I did notice you saying, get in touch, and I thought, reached out, and you got back straight away. So really appreciate that.
But no worries, I'm flattered. I just wanted a few people to watch the video, and the fact that hundreds of thousands of people have now watched the video is still very surreal. But I want to be as supportive as I can to Bitcoin meetups around the world. And this is my first one in Australia, and hopefully it won't be the last one. But yeah, it's great. I'm very pleased to be here today, and within the last 24 hours, we've had. Well, I spoke with what's now Strategies staff yesterday for sort of a lunch and learn. We had a presentation in Malta run by people who've picked up the materials and delivered it in person, which is exactly what I would love to do. And we've had something in Brazil as well, and now we've got Australia. So we're covering all corners of the globe within the last 24 hours. And my hope is just everybody gets to see this, and then we're a big step closer to actually moving towards the solution.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's incredible. Let's just take a step back, and I just wanted to kind of introduce you a bit. So for those who don't know, I'll just got a bit of a spiel here. You're an entrepreneur, investor, and advisor with an impressive background, including roles at Goldman Sachs and Superbet. I noticed you've also got physics there as well. Was that your what you studied, or?
Yeah, at university.
Yep, great. Obviously, great for Bitcoin. Having an understanding of physics.
Yeah, there's a lot of people with physics or engineering backgrounds, I think, get drawn to Bitcoin because of the structure. I think it's naturally lends itself to be more accessible when you come at it with that sort of structured mindset. That's not to say it's not accessible to everybody else. It's just it's harder, I think. It's one of the challenges that we need to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything I missed there from your intro? Anything else about yourself you wanted to share?
What? No, I mean, I've got two teenage daughters, which I don't tend to mention on calls because it's nice to keep the separation from the work and the private side. But yeah, I spent a lot of time in sports as well, which is not really mentioned. But sports betting and modelling of sports from a mathematical perspective. Although I think most of the sports that you guys are interested in down there are not ones that I've really done before, apart from cricket.
Yeah, there's still definitely plenty of betting going on down here. I don't take part myself, but there could be some in the room who do. Hopefully no shitcoining though.
Oh no, although everybody, I think most people end up touching it on the way in until they realise why Bitcoin is the only thing that matters. And so it's almost like a rite of passage, I think.
Yeah, actually, what about your Bitcoin background? When did you first hear about it, get involved?
Oh, 2020, I started properly going down the rabbit hole. But like most people, it comes across your radar, 1 or 2 times before, and typically you dismiss it, either because it's you don't put the work, certainly because you don't put the work in, but often the person talking to you about it is not. Not necessarily the most convincing, or you hear it in the wrong setting or at the wrong time for you. And so, I harbor regrets about not taking it seriously earlier on. But since 2020, I mean, it's been 5 years now of going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. And at this point, there is just nothing else more important to be working on. Everything else is irrelevant.
Yeah, you say 2020. Yeah, I remember that point in time. Was it during when COVID was kicking off, or when Bitcoin, had its crash along with the rest of the market, or was it around that time?
Yeah, it was May 2020. So just after the crash, when we're all, stuck inside.
Yeah. Oh well, I hope you were able to take advantage of some cheap sats at the time.
Oh, well, a lot cheaper than today, certainly, but not as cheap as they would have been a few years before. But today is still cheap.
Yeah,
it always looks expensive, but always ends up being cheap.
Yeah, it's always expensive at the time, right? Always. So, I guess incredible video. What really inspired you to make it?
I didn't set out to make a video. I was invited to a weekend away with a friend, and he invited 15 of his friends who I didn't know. And this was towards the end of last year, so it was October. And he asked everyone to bring something to talk about. And other people invited were of entrepreneurial backgrounds. And so, I wanted to talk about Bitcoin, but I didn't. I was only going to have half an hour. And, trying to teach someone about Bitcoin in half an hour is challenging, especially when you don't know who they are, you don't know what their background is, what level of exposure they've had or anything. So I sort of made it a bit simpler for myself. I just sort of said, can I get them to be interested to learn about Bitcoin in half an hour? And then to be able to create something which was literally just the presentation that you've seen there is something I gave in person to this group of people. And yeah, I think it delivered, and the feedback I got sort of encouraged me to share this with everyone. Not expecting a huge number of people to watch it, but it was more like I've produced something here which is clearly effective, and it's been road tested, and I should just give everyone the opportunity to have access to it and to share it with their friends and family and loved ones. So yeah, it's the only video I've ever created, and I think it probably will be the only video I ever create. But yeah, so the last month has been a bit of a strange experience after ended up getting Saylor to his 4 million followers, which was not what I was expecting to happen. A few days after launching the video to 2 men and a dog on X.
Yeah, I'll just let everyone know, in case for those who don't know, Michael Saylor, he's the chairman now of MicroStrategy, and they own almost 500,000 Bitcoin, I think now. He's just gone nuts and basically just been using, I guess, debt, or another way is maybe taking advantage of the Fiat, the credit system, by taking out loans, etc. And there's a number of different ways he's raising money essentially to buy Bitcoin, but he's very well known in the Bitcoin world, and he absolutely gets it. And yeah, Michael Saylor, anyway, if you look him up, you'll find plenty of YouTube videos and things like that. So
is the sort of preeminent Bitcoin company globally. They've been around for a long time, and they are sort of a business analytics software business. But since 2020, Michael Saylor has been acquiring more and more Bitcoin on their balance sheet and really weaponizing fiat to destroy itself, which is inevitably going to happen. And so he's taken this to a scale which would be unachievable anywhere else in the world, but because they're a US technology company, they've got access to capital markets that everywhere else in the world would be beyond reach. He is probably the most well-known in Bitcoin circles outside of Satoshi and perhaps one or two of the early guys. And somehow he came across the video and downloaded it and then reposted it and just wrote, "What's the problem?" to 4 million people, which caused my phone to explode, and has led me to spend a lot more time over the last month since making the video to work with lots of people across the world to get it translated into, we have almost 30 languages now, native language YouTube subtitles, all done by Bitcoiners around the world who just got in touch. And now I've made all the materials open to everybody. So if you go onto the Sats versus Fiat website, in the materials section, you've got all the slides, the speaker notes, the transcripts, and we're doing that in every language. So we've got about 10 live, and it's open on a non-commercial Creative Commons license. So anybody anywhere can take it and do whatever they want with it. Educate other people, remix it, change it, build upon it. As long as you're not selling it, that's fine. And yeah, I've just been blown away by the level of engagement across the world here, and hopefully we can get to a point where everyone can see it.
Yeah, it's incredible. Can you see us better now?
I can see you all now. It's perfect. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, good. Yeah. So I'm using this new thing, StreamYard, and anyway, so just still getting used to it. What sort of reaction have you had? Have you had any surprising feedback, or have you had much negative feedback about it, or has it just all been overwhelmingly good?
99% extremely positive. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of YouTube comments, which is just great reading to read through, because it's a mix of people who already understand and feel like this is what we all carry in our heads. This is what we all know from listening to all the podcasts, reading all the books, but trying to explain that to somebody who hasn't done that work is really challenging. And so I think nothing in this is new to a Bitcoiner who spent hundreds of hours, but the way it's delivered, especially in the story narrative, just makes it much more acceptable to everybody. And it doesn't have any sharp edges. So it's apolitical, it's done as a story, it doesn't assume any knowledge. And at every point as you work through it, even if you don't like Bitcoin, you find yourself agreeing with it all. And it doesn't mention Bitcoin until the end. And so people end up convincing themselves on the way through that this is entirely logical and that they've come to the conclusion themselves that there's a problem that needs a solution, and then the solution at the end. And so reading the comments is nice, really nice validation of that. But then also you get people who have never seen this before and the penny is just dropped. And that's amazing too, because they're like, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what it was. But of course, you always do get some people who are negative about it. And often it's about, like, some people don't like the music, which is fine. There's very little I can do about that now because it's out there. Or maybe just release a version without the music. But I would say the biggest pushback comes from the people who are most entrenched in the existing system and who have been brainwashed with Keynesian economics to think that we need inflation, that inflation is a good thing, which is just totally bonkers. And their argument normally goes, well, if we didn't have inflation, people wouldn't be incentivized to spend and the economy would slow down, which is the whole basis of like Keynesian economics. It's like, oh, that's not how the world works. You're effectively you're building your entire economy on the need to steal from people to make it work, which is ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. And that's not how the world works. The natural state of the world is a deflationary one. Technology drives deflation. We all know this, like it's obvious. We showed that in 3 minutes in the video. It is just human action. And, the entire existing edifice of economics is built on a lie. It's not built on human action. And so those who are most entrenched from that perspective, it's like a mental 180 they need to do here. And when you're asking someone to do a mental 180, when their entire life and credibility is entrenched within the position they hold, and you're telling them it's 180 degrees wrong, that can be quite jarring for them. And so, maybe there's 1 or 2% of the comments which are negative, but even those I try and reply to, and in a constructive way. We just need everyone to understand Austrian economics, and it just makes just natural sense to everybody. Everything else is the Keynesian stuff is just hand wavy nonsense that doesn't stand up to the real world.
Yeah, no, I think the way the order how you present the video is brilliant, because and I was talking to someone recently, and I often ask, how do you talk to someone who doesn't understand Bitcoin, and how do you, instead of just sort of going at them with, well, this is what Bitcoin is and this is what it can do, rather look at the problem and ask, well, what's difficult in your life, and they might say, well, I don't seem to have as much money anymore, or things are getting more expensive. And then you just start with those problems, right? And you work your way back, and then say, okay, well, let's try to get to the root cause here of those. And then maybe, you get to the root cause of that, and then could be an opportunity to then talk about, well, maybe we need something like Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I put all the problems up front. I could have written so many more down there very easily, but people see them as being disconnected things because it's complicated. It's really complicated. And most people don't naturally think in multiple steps of cause and effect. Everyone can sense there's something off, and things are, not improving and deteriorating in most countries. I mean, certainly in the UK, but not knowing why makes it really uneasy. But then when you lay it out, it's like the number of times I've had a sort of on the slide with the flow chart where all the boxes get revealed and cause and effect. Before I filmed the video, I probably did it to 30 people in small groups, different backgrounds, just to get a sense of, the words I was using, making sure I shaved off any remaining sharp edges before I recorded the video. But the number of times I get to the end of that slide for people who don't have a financial background, and they would just say, "Oh wow, I never knew this, and it makes so much sense, and I never knew where these things came from." I was just like, okay, well, this is probably the most impactful slide in there. And so yeah, people just want stability to understand. Like if you feel like your foundations are constantly getting undermined, but you don't know why, that's really not a nice place to be. Once you understand why, then you can take steps to protect yourself. Feel like you can increase your level of personal control, of autonomy, and then you begin to plan for the future in a way that is abnormal today.
Yeah, I know. In one of those charts, you had obviously included kind of being on the path to communism as well. And I mean, I wonder what your thoughts are and kind of where we're headed. I mean, UK, Australia, well, we're all on similar paths. You know, obviously we have Bitcoin and we can buy Bitcoin, and we all struggle to buy Bitcoin. I know people in this room that struggle to buy it. Banks, you know, stopping transactions, calling them fraud and things like that. And that's evidence of just those controls coming through already. And where to from here? Does the government just continue growing? What does it look like ahead? How does it look for you the next few years, perhaps?
Well, I would caveat and say I really don't know the first thing about Australian politics, so take everything with a pinch.
It's not pretty.
Yeah, well, I can imagine. I suspect it's slightly better than where we are at the moment. But you know, we are now out of step. I can see someone in the background.
Head shaking in the background.
Head shaking. Yeah. Or let's just say they're equally poor at the moment. But we're out of lockstep, especially in the UK with the US now, because we had our election about 6 months ago, and we've gone socialist effectively, and the US has gone back in the right direction, away from the craziness. And you know, the presentation is apolitical, intentionally apolitical, because the big red button, everybody uses it regardless of which side of the aisle you're on. You're in much greater danger, depending on which side of the aisle you're on, of slipping into a authoritarian state, largely through communism. And we are just totally on the wrong path. Totally, it is. We have nobody in the US, in the UK cabinet, who's ever run a business, has ever started a business.
Career politicians.
Businesses are the enemy. The government, because of the use of the big red button, just positions itself as needing to get involved in everything. And you take that to its conclusion, unless you make a sharp U-turn like the US has been able to do, it means just the US gets involved, the government gets involved in absolutely everything. And ultimately it leads to socialism, and then it leads to communism. Yeah, we've got a long 4 years ahead of us here until we get to change course. I don't know when the Australian elections are, but I do hope that the swing back to the centre from an ideology perspective from the US will begin to seep into politics around the world.
Do you think the US is going to affect, you know, the UK, for example, and subsequently other nations?
Oh, it has to. It has to, because we get to see on our news, half the stuff we see on our news is America. And the compare and contrast could not be sharper right now. You know, the positive steps that the US administration is taking to root out corruption, fraud, waste, even though they cannot solve the problem, because the problem is the big red button, and they're never going to hand back control of the big red button. They're trying to take the sword to the deficit and cut all the waste and spending and shine sunlight on the cumulative effects of government corruption, waste, and ideologically driven spending. Now, you know, the momentum is beginning to shift in the UK. We have people actively trying to do the same thing. And so it's inevitable, given that the US shapes media globally, certainly for the UK, that it would have some positive impact. But structurally, it remains challenging, because Labour in the UK are not going to hand back power, because as soon as they call an election, they're going to be gone. So we are stuck with it. Thankfully, we have Bitcoin, and everybody can unilaterally opt into Bitcoin. Each of us individually can begin to separate money and state. Once enough of us do that, we reach a tipping point fairly quickly where it becomes very clear you need to get on board, or else you're going to lose. And this applies equally to other individuals as it does to governments. You can't fight Bitcoin and expect to win. And that's already become very clear over the last 6 months. I mean, the Democrats tried to fight it and they lost in the US. You don't win votes by fighting it. You don't win any votes by fighting it. You gain a lot of votes by embracing it. And so what are you going to do? You're going to embrace it. And that's just going to accelerate adoption, understanding. And it takes time for that to work through banking systems and, you know, perception changes and things. But the tide has changed, has shifted. We're just at the very early stages of that. In 4 years' time, the world will be hopefully in a much more supportive place for the adoption and use of Bitcoin. But it doesn't stop us It doesn't stop us making decisions for ourselves on a daily basis and sharing that knowledge with other people. It's just the state needs to catch up.
Yeah, that's absolutely why we started this group, and why videos like your own are so important. I know it takes people different amounts of time to come to the conclusion that they need to invest in Bitcoin, to buy Bitcoin, to protect themselves from the inflation. And yeah, I guess unfortunately it's just only natural that certain people will get in early and certain people will get in late, and hopefully there's just a massive tide that occurs at some point where a lot of people pile in, and then we sort of see more people get that protection, I guess.
Well, Bitcoin is the first global free market. If you are not spending the time to learn about Bitcoin, there is no one else to blame but yourself. Put the effort in, learn about it, and you'll never go back. It's the highest return on investment of any amount of time you could possibly spend in your life. Yeah, again, it's one of the potential criticisms that especially people who are on the far left would level against Bitcoin is, well, you're going to end up with a system where some people have more than others. Yeah, but anything else is communism. Anything else is communism. Right? It's a free market system. If you were worried about that, spend the time and learn about it. No one's stopping you. And Bitcoin is going to break down all borders. It is a global free market. And even if people are not adopting it, they will see the benefit of it in the long run, and when they do eventually adopt it, even when it's far more expensive, because it's going to raise the standard of living for everybody globally, and unlock a sort of a next level renaissance within humanity as we begin to break down all these old systems that have been introducing friction and stealing everyone's productivity for 70 years. Once that productivity starts accruing back to the population, you're going to see such an uplift in global living standards. It's going to be amazing. But it's very hard for people to see that. And just like, when you have on both sides of the island, even the unproductive people benefit from that, because your purchasing power starts to go up. And so Bitcoin is the world's first truly global free market, and it's everyone acting in their own interest for the benefit of everybody else. And you can't beat that. If you fight it, you're going to lose. You just will. Yeah. You can't beat that.
Yeah, I think painting that picture of what a world on a Bitcoin standard, could look like, I think that could be incredible. Maybe could that be your next video? Really trying to paint that picture of what it could be like. Yeah.
I mean, the thought of doing another video at this point, I don't know. Maybe ask me again in 6 months. 6 months, Lucky. But I'd encourage anybody else to pick up the ball and run with it. Like, it doesn't have to be me. Like, the materials are all there. Like, if you want to go and create a video about the Bitcoin standard, let's go do it. You have my support. So I won't say no, but just maybe at some point.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something I've thought about it a lot, because I mean, after I read the Bitcoin standard, I got lucky that somehow I heard about the Bitcoin standard back in 2018, and I read the book, and I had been doing a bit of shitcoining up to that point, and seeing myself as a bit of a crypto trader and thinking this is it, and then I hit a bear market, and it's like, oh, okay, no, maybe I'm not going to be a crypto trader. And then I fortunately picked up the Bitcoin standard, and and like your video, like, it presents the problem so well, and touches on, and obviously gives the solution. But I think, to be able to paint that picture of what the world could look like with Bitcoin, I think that could be another step that could really help people.
I think Safedine is releasing in April.
Yes.
The gold standard, and which is because he's done the Bitcoin standard, he's done the Fiat standard, which is also an amazing book. But the gold standard, I think, and he's released the first 4 chapters, but I've intentionally not read them because I'm going to be then annoyed that I can't read the rest of the book. So I'm waiting for the full release. But I understand it's a fictional history of what effectively a Bitcoin standard looks like, because it's the gold standard, but they introduce it's like a proxy to how Bitcoin works, but as if it was gold, and transporting gold around the world, etc., etc. And I suspect that is going to tick a lot of that box for you, Lucky.
Yeah, I think you're
so
right.
I wouldn't go making a video in the next 2 months until you've seen what Safedine comes out with, just to make sure you're not wasting your time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I took the same. I read that about his upcoming book, and I was sitting there just hoping that that's the sort of picture he's going to paint. So that's something to look forward to. Obviously, do you think hyperinflation is inevitable with our currencies?
I think what's inevitable is the purchasing power goes to zero, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who could structure an argument to say that it's not. When you have a big red button, that's the inevitable outcome. It goes to zero. Hyperinflation it really comes down to the speed at which that happens. Some currencies exhibit it already. Are we likely to see the same happen in Australia or the UK or the US? Probably not. Probably not. You just get sustained periods of inflation that take it to zero faster. But you don't need hyperinflation to destroy it. Even if you had 10% a year for 5 years, you've wiped most of it out. And so it is just degrees. But we know it's happening, and it is going to happen. You can't put money in the bank and keep it. Everyone knows this.
You mentioned that.
Even people who don't understand really what inflation is or how to explain inflation. They know intuitively they cannot put money in the bank and it retain its purchasing power 5 years from now, 10 years from now. They know this. They can't explain why it's the case, but they know that. And the fact that it's intuitive for everyone just tells you how broken the system is. So nobody can put money in the bank and think the purchasing power is going to go up in the future. And therefore, you know what the outcome is going to be. It's just more of the same. And when you're stacking more and more liabilities, more and more debt, the hole's just getting bigger. So you just have to press the button more and more and more. There isn't a question mark over the outcome. The question mark is over the time it takes and the path it takes.
Yeah, I wonder if Bitcoin is going to increase the rate of inflation, because you mentioned obviously MicroStrategy before and how they're really obviously, what's the word? It's like a speculative attack on the fiat system in a way, what they're doing. And obviously there's more and more companies copying the Saylor playbook. Like, do you think that has an effect where this credit creation that starts occurring with these institutions and companies, taking advantage, maybe that increases the rate of inflation?
It accelerates the death of fiat. And I guess, therefore, if you're just saying inflation, very more debasement, of which we see the effects through inflation of everyday items. Everybody's doing the same, making the same bet, and it's just the degree to which you're making that bet. When you're not keeping cash in the bank and you're buying a second house or you're buying some speculative, you are making that bet. The underlying reason is that you can't trust the money, and so but you're making a bet only to protect what you have. What strategy, and the strategy is the new name of MicroStrategy. What they are doing is taking an even bigger bet to say, I'm not just trying to protect myself because you're pressing the big red button. I want to benefit because you press the big red button, and I know you're going to press it. People and individuals also do that by taking out big mortgages and buying property and then seeing the value of the property go up. But often they don't know why that. It's not an active choice. It's not like I'm buying this property to hedge against the big red button. I'm just buying this property because it seems like a good deal because it always goes up. But he's been very, very deliberate, and more companies are copying it. More and more individuals are taking out debt as well to do this thing. Although, I wouldn't recommend introducing debt into your own lives to do these things, because, Bitcoin is volatile with good reason, and it's a feature, not a bug, but it's still volatile. It is just going to accelerate the decline. The more people opt into Bitcoin, the more fiat crises they have, the more they press the big red button, which means the more people opt into Bitcoin. The cycle just goes round and round. But nothing is stopping anybody from opting in. Is wonderful about the world today. It's like 20 years ago, you'd have been stuffed, absolutely stuffed, because you're trapped in a country, forced to use a currency that someone else you have to work for, someone else can print for free. There is no escape there. And even the hard assets that you buy or could buy are really just hard assets with really soft edges. They go up in price, or people dig more out the ground and the price goes back down, or their assets are physically attached to somewhere that the government can change the tax treatment of, or just outright take back if they ever needed to. And so you don't really own anything. There is no escape. Whereas Bitcoin is not only the scarcest asset in the universe, it's also something you can hold yourself and carry it in your head. There is the escape hatch, and as Christine Lagarde says, if there's an escape hatch, people will use it. Well, people only need an escape hatch when there's a problem. So it's a good job we've got an escape hatch.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine, what it would be like if we didn't have Bitcoin now. But I mean, now that we have it, they say nothing stops this train, but that not only applies to the fiat inflationary system, but also Bitcoin, right? Like as you mentioned, I mean, Bitcoin can't be stopped now. It's way beyond the point of no return.
It is, and everyone is incentives. Everyone's incentives are aligned. Everyone acts in their own self-interest ultimately, and when everyone acts in their own self-interest, and that is to the benefit of everyone else, you create a system which is anti-fragile. It eventually sucks everybody in because everyone benefits, and there is just no way. There's no way to defeat it. But this realization is so new, and has only really occurred to a very small number of people. Like, look how many people are in the room today. It's very small, but the outcome's already known. It's just a question of time.
Yeah, it's incredible. There's a lot of people who live in this area, hundreds of thousands, and each month we only ever get little small groups, and we're the only Bitcoin meetup that I know of around here. But yeah, it just shows you where we're at.
It shows you how early we are. Like if you went out into the street where you live and you ask 100 people, why do we need Bitcoin? I mean, how many people are going to be able to tell you a concise answer on that? I don't know, 1 in 100 maybe. And so, you look at the price of like $100,000, or that means slightly less now, but people say, oh, well, I've missed it. It's already gone up. It's too late. We're just so unbelievably early. The world is asleep on this thing. Still after 16 years.
I think we do definitely have some new people in the room, and possibly some no coiners and things too. I'm sure they'd be interested to hear of maybe what your take is maybe on we have the cycles in Bitcoin, and often we have the in the 4-year cycles, we're in that sort of typical bull market year this year, potentially leading into a bear market later this year, next year. What's your feeling? Do you think we're going to continue having those cycles? And I think, well, as you were alluding to before, that, we're still early. So $100,000 is, we're going to basically keep going up from there with volatility. But yeah, what do you think about, price over the next few years maybe? And you don't have to give exact predictions because I know that's difficult.
I won't give any predictions, luckily. But Bitcoin is on a path to monetize the world. And so all of the reason, I mean, house prices in Australia are insane. Much like, a lot of countries, but I know you guys feel it particularly strongly. It's just an example of an asset that has been monetized as a store of value for people because they can't rely on the cash, right? As well as the amount of debt that you can take, etc. Like as the combination of those two. If you had Bitcoin, or everybody understood Bitcoin, house prices wouldn't be where they are. The stock market wouldn't be where it is. Hard assets wouldn't be where they are because it would all be in Bitcoin. It's like, why would you buy a property and have the headache of managing that, the upkeep, the management of the tenants, the property taxes that your government can change at the stroke of a pen, the risk of them just taking it if you say something that the government doesn't like. Why would you give yourself all those headaches when you could just own Bitcoin as the world's most efficient economic battery to store your economic energy? You just wouldn't. So few people realize this, that you effectively have assets all over the place that have been monetized already. Those things are going to get demonetized in favor of Bitcoin over time. This is not a quick process. And, if you look at Bitcoin, you see the 4-year cycles and things like this. You're really just seeing human psychology overlaid on top of an asset, which is just gradually monetizing the world. And so you probably can see the same things happening, whether it's on the same time scales or not. But I would encourage everybody not to think about timing Bitcoin or trading Bitcoin, because what's happened in the past may not happen in the future. And you want to make sure when you buy Bitcoin, you understand why you're buying it. And the reason you're buying it is because you never want to sell it. Right? Because why would you ever sell it? What would you sell it for? Like if you're selling Bitcoin for fiat is like going to somebody. Here's a good example. When I gave the presentation to the very first group of people who I'd never met before, one of the guys in the audience was Lebanese. And at the end of the presentation, he went, "Oh my God, this is exactly what happened." Right. and he lived through it, but he didn't fully understand what had happened. And he came up to me afterwards and said, if I buy Bitcoin, when will I be able to sell it and take profits? Things like this. It's a very common question. Think about where you were in Lebanon, where every day people are fighting to get rid of their local currency to get dollars, because the local currency is just depreciating so rapidly. Would it ever make sense for somebody who's fighting every day to get rid of their Lebanese lira or pounds into dollars, for someone to say, well, when are you going to take some profits on those dollars and move them back into Lebanese lira? That's just totally nonsensical, because it's just going to decay even further. So why would I ever do that? And thinking about Bitcoin relative to fiat currencies is exactly the same. It's just that our fiat currencies compared to the one in Lebanon or, hundreds of other countries around the world, is just decaying at a much slower rate. It's still decaying, still ultimately going to zero. Why would you ever sell it? Something that's going to zero. And so don't trade Bitcoin. Don't think about ever selling Bitcoin. Buy it when you understand why you're buying it, so you never plan to sell it. And there will be a point in the future, in the long run, where we'll be paying in Bitcoin, we'll be transacting in Bitcoin, and this already happens in certain parts of the world, small areas, but it's coming everywhere. And then it won't be selling it; it'll just be using it. It'll just be using it because everything else is gone. That's the sort of timescale outlook that I have for Bitcoin. It's going to take time. It's going to take time, but in my view, it's inevitable.
Yeah. Do you see, what do you think that looks like for you? Do you think it's speeding up? I mean, Bitcoin adoption, I think it's always growing. I know, because I see some of the charts and various metrics and things like that, but do you think it starts to speed up a bit like a snowball?
Oh, adoption, certainly. It's like a virus. I mean, we've had enough of viruses over the last few years, but this one's a good one. And a real one. Once you've walked through the door of Bitcoin, your mind changes, the way that you think about the world changes. And there's no chance of you ever going back. Like, the thought of you now turning around and going, well, this Bitcoin is a waste of time, isn't it? I want to go back to the fiat system. Zero chance. Right?
Yeah.
And what happens, the more of us there are, the more we talk to other people, the more that we influence the world around us with our day-to-day actions, whether it's speaking with people, whether it's asking to pay in Bitcoin, whether it's favoring merchants that are Bitcoin merchants, whether they accept it or they're just run by Bitcoiners. And that is a never-ending process until you've just consumed everything. And so the more of us there are, the faster we move. And then the more of us there are, the faster we move. And it's that gradually, then suddenly. And up to this point, it has been very much a bottom-up process. It's been people all around the world doing the work themselves and then trying to bring others along. But every month that passes, every year that passes, we make it easier for the next cohort of people to arrive, because we create new material, which then makes the logical leap much smaller for the next person. Right? Because we started with a white paper, and anyone reading the white paper, that's such a massive leap to read just the white paper and nothing else and think, I know what the future holds. Right? That is such a gargantuan leap. But we start building these extra layers. Like, the bridge to normal world is almost complete now, almost. And soon people will begin, hopefully, to use Bitcoin in applications. It will become easy and increasingly frictionless, because there is a lot of friction that still remains. And that's when you get the early majority and the majority, because they just start using it and they don't even have to think about what Bitcoin is. They don't have to really understand it. And, we have this pincer effect, whereas, it's bottom up, but now we've got countries sniffing around. And if the US sets up a strategic Bitcoin reserve, it becomes a national security issue for every other country in the world. Like, are you really going to let the US have the biggest slice of Bitcoin as the new pristine collateral that underpins the entire financial system as a preference over gold? And you're going to continue to hold gold? Really? No, you've got to buy Bitcoin as well. Even if it's just defensive, you have to buy Bitcoin. It's going to happen to every country. And so you've got the low level, you've got the countries, and then gradually it just fills all the space in between, all the companies, all the states, everything. And so we're still early, but adoption is increasing. And yeah, I think 5 years from now, it's going to look like a radically different world.
Yeah, absolutely. Fix the money, fix the world. It really is so true. I was going to say, we probably don't have too much longer. And sorry, Joe, just breaking up a little bit.
I think it froze there. Sorry, I think I talked over you. Apologies.
I was just going to say, I want to sort of just open it up to see if anyone's got any questions here in the room, because we won't keep you too much longer. What sort of ideas you might have around accumulating Bitcoin? Like, are there strategies that you might recommend, for example?
Well, I mean, come back to don't trade Bitcoin. It's whatever suits you as the individual. I buy it on a monthly basis, repeatedly on a monthly basis, because that makes sense for me. Certain tools available vary by market, and the way that you access Bitcoin varies by country as well. So, in the US, there are some tools available where you can just buy Bitcoin on a daily basis, and it happens automatically. I don't keep anything on exchange or with a custodian, and so it's much better for me to do it one-off once a month, and I can take that straight away into cold storage than it is to accumulate something on a platform every day over the course of a month, because I own Bitcoin if somebody else holds it for me. I own a promise. It's no different from the fiat system. And so, it depends on your circumstances, your preferences, and also the country that you're in. But also, if there are new people new to Bitcoin in the room, you don't have to buy a Bitcoin. It sounds obvious, but again, if you asked 100 people on the street, most people say, well, I can't afford a Bitcoin. They're $100,000. So you don't need to buy a Bitcoin. You could buy just some sats. You can get 1,000 sats for a dollar, or a US dollar. So if you're gonna buy it, just buy something small and get used to it. Send it to yourself, send it to friends, self-custody, restore your wallet. Bitcoin is about building conviction over time. Conviction in why it's important, what it's going to change, how it works. And you get up the curve faster with this by playing with it and doing things. So even if you're buying $10 worth, just do it and get started.
If someone has like a lump sum of money, for example, and they come to you, what would you recommend? Or
I would recommend watching the video and then watching the other videos on the website, and only buying Bitcoin when you understand why you want to buy Bitcoin. I'm not offering anyone any financial advice. I'm not telling anyone to buy Bitcoin. What I'm encouraging people to do is just to learn about it, because if you learn about it, you'll then make the right decisions for you, given your circumstances, etc. Because if you buy Bitcoin today without really understanding why you're doing it, when the price goes up, you'll sell it. You'll take your profit back into Lebanese lira, or the price will go down, because that's what normally happens. You buy it and it drops 40%, and you'll panic and you'll sell it, right? Instead of smiling and buying more of it. Like you reach a point with Bitcoin, I think, where it's like, I term it Bitcoin Zen, where you get annoyed and the price is going up, because you're like, I haven't finished buying it. If it goes down, I can buy more of it. Which sounds just nonsense to people who haven't got to that point yet. It's like, well, you're annoyed that the price has gone up, or you're happy that the price has gone down. It's like, how is that a sensible investment approach? It's just, you're going to be buying it forever, and there's a fixed supply, and I know you're all going to end up buying it forever as well. So the longer the price stays low, the better, because I know where it's ultimately going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Why didn't you sort of get into Bitcoin early when it first sort of came your way? What kind of stopped you? And then what was it in 2020 that finally made you jump in?
So first time was probably 2012-ish. And I was working at UBS at the time, and one of the young lads on the desk was mining Bitcoin with his PC at home. And and I thought it was interesting. But at that point, I had 2 very young children, a mortgage, several years after the financial crisis. I didn't have that financial space, or the mental space to be engaging with it. I hated what I was doing, and I was fighting every day just to get through the day so I can go home to my family. It was interesting, but it wasn't the right time for me to engage with it. And then the second time was probably 2015-16, when my brother was telling me all about it. If anybody in the world was telling me about it, I'd take it more seriously than if my brother was telling me about it. And so he would laugh at that. It's very similar, and maybe you've come across this article. If not, I would recommend reading it. And it's called Why the UP Elite Don't Get Bitcoin, written by Croesus. And it's a tremendous article. And it really goes to explain why there's just this natural resistance to Bitcoin from a certain segment of the population. And at the time, I was in that segment, because I was in the financial system. My entire career had been in investment banks and trading. And so for my brother, who who had taken a very different route in life. He's much more creative. He's an actor. For him to be telling me about how the financial system is broken and this thing over here is going to fix it. It was such a clash that I never took it seriously. It was, it's a Ponzi scheme. It's this, it's that. What most people would think, especially when you absorb mainstream media and these sorts of things. But this is why you've got to do the work. Like, I kick myself now for not taking it seriously. But most people have several touch points with it at various times until something clicks. They're either in the right position or someone explains it. The right person at the right time explains it or introduces it to them. And then in 2020, we were locked in our houses. I was listening to Real Vision at the time. Real Vision's become a very different platform for financial content since, but at the time it was pre all the shitcoin stuff. It was proper global macro. And Raoul Pal was going down that rabbit hole with Bitcoin. Almost at the same time, for about 6 months, I'd just be consuming that content just relentlessly and then just reading. But again, came to it from this looks like a great risk reward trade. Some extra fiatellos, not this is going to separate money and state and I'm not going to need the fiatellos anymore perspective. And then gradually that shifts. But I think that's how most people find Bitcoin, is they see it as a way to make some more fiatellos until they realize they don't need to.
Yeah, so true. It's shifting that mindset, isn't it? And it just takes time.
I do worry that our governments will go sort of extreme fascist and lock down Bitcoin and try and ban it. So my question is, what country are you thinking of moving to?
I would love to move to Texas. I would also consider Portugal as one closer to home. I'm unfortunately still within the EU, but the US is the place to be. They value freedom, self-sovereignty. But I'm more optimistic over time. I think we're in that danger zone at the moment. I think I would be extremely worried had Trump not got in the US. What will come over the next few years. But I think the alignment of incentives around Bitcoin solves this problem for us, given time. Because what naturally happens is, I've never met a Bitcoiner who thinks big government is a good idea. If your central thesis is Bitcoin is going to infect everybody, then once everyone's infected, no one's voting for big government. People are voting to be left alone, to have self-sovereignty, all of these things. And so reasonably soon you'll get to that tipping point, which becomes much more explicit. You need to be embracing Bitcoin. You need to be appealing to people who hold Bitcoin in order to get into power. And therefore it takes you hopefully dramatically away from those sorts of risks. So I'm much more optimistic about the future than, I'll say, 99.9% of people, certainly in the UK. But that's because of Bitcoin, and solely because of Bitcoin. And that's why I'm a one issue voter.
Yeah, that's great.
Just got to get through these next few years.
Yeah,
I can see just having a vision with that perspective you shared. I could almost imagine a bit of a soft landing for us all with Bitcoin, where it is this gradual infection and then, and gradually government just naturally shrinks and, hopefully no real serious harm done. It just gradually changes over time.
I would broadly agree with that. I think there are going to be winners and losers, because you don't want to be the last one to adopt it. Right? Bitcoin is a competitive advantage for everybody that holds it, whether you're an individual, a company, or a country. I mean, explicitly from a value accretion perspective, because we all know what's going to happen over time, but also in the way that it changes you and it changes your mindset, it changes the way you think about the future. And because Bitcoiners are maniacal, there is no convincing us that Bitcoin is not going to fix everything. If somebody starts a business and they accept Bitcoin, they're a Bitcoiner, they immediately have all the other Bitcoiners' support. So it becomes a competitive advantage, even if they're not necessarily accepting Bitcoin. I'd rather give my fiat to a Bitcoiner than someone who's not a Bitcoiner. And so when you play that forward, it incentivizes all companies, all countries to embrace it, because it drives goodwill, and the Bitcoin community is such a giving, motivated community. I mean, even if you think about Bitcoiners as a consumer segment, very clear in our views, we're increasingly wealthy, we're highly motivated to support people who embrace it, and we're very forgiving. We realize it's not perfect and that we're all moving and trying to figure these things out. That segment is only growing globally, and most companies haven't figured this out yet, because most companies unless you've gone through the door of Bitcoin, you don't recognize that consumer segment for what it is. But it means that we're going to be able to drive a huge amount of change just from our spending power alone and our daily actions over these next few years. So Bitcoin is just a competitive advantage for everybody who adopts it.
You mentioned real estate, and like we've got a pretty strong real estate market in Australia, and it's like residential real estate, I think 70% is owner occupied. And you mentioned about, say, like the demonetizing, say, of using real estate as a store of wealth. And I was wondering if you foresee, like obviously with real estate, if 70% of it owner occupied, they're doing it for shelter, for primarily, one would think. Maybe partly as a store of wealth, primarily for shelter. Do you foresee like things getting to a point where people would prioritize, say, a store of wealth over the need for shelter, because it might be that you need the store of wealth to actually keep the shelter over your head?
It's an interesting question. I think a lot of this depends on how you measure things. So we're measuring housing in fiatellos, and they're constantly printing more fiatellos. So those things are just going up. But if you measure housing in Bitcoin, it only goes down over time. So it becomes cheaper and cheaper in Bitcoin terms. Housing didn't used to be a monetized asset. Obviously, some property is more desirable than other property. You're in Times Square or something like that. That's going to be more expensive than if you're, out in the sticks somewhere. Like that's just, it's really supply and demand overlaid on housing. But housing as an asset class is a utility. It's never been a store of meaningful value outside of that supply and demand constraint. Once people start saving in Bitcoin, they'll see their houses depreciating and not accruing in value. And in which case, why would you want anything other than Bitcoin? Your economic energy into a house, which next year is going to be worth less Bitcoin than it's worth this year. It doesn't really make sense. A lot of it just stems from frame of reference in which you're measuring these things. And one of the questions people often ask is, well, how are you going to be able to afford a mortgage if everything's in Bitcoin? And everything gets cheaper every year because you'll have borrowed some Bitcoin. Every year things get cheaper. It's harder and harder to earn the same amount of Bitcoin because the quality of life for everyone is going up. Things are getting cheaper. So how are you ever going to be able to repay the mortgage, that fixed amount of Bitcoin that you own? And it's, again, a lot of these questions come from slightly the wrong starting point. You're not going to need a big mortgage to buy a house in Bitcoin because housing becomes a much less attractive asset to own. So people will be selling their housing to buy Bitcoin. So the prices come down.
Renting.
Yeah, the prices come down. It's just a free market when measured in Bitcoin, right? And then so gradually it will be demonetized into Bitcoin, and where it becomes more of a utility asset, in which case you don't need the mortgage to buy it because buying it is a liability, not an asset for you. You buy it because you need somewhere to live, and it's the Bitcoin you're using as the store of value. So I realize that's sort of turning thinking on its head a little bit, but hopefully that's helpful.
It's just like, what about adding leverage to buy properties? You can't do that with Bitcoin.
Well, you can do that with Bitcoin, but you have to actually borrow Bitcoin from somebody. There's no sense of fractional reserve banking on a Bitcoin standard unless it's within a walled garden, because one of the issues that I sort of don't touch at all within the video is money creation within the banking system and fractional reserve banking. Now, the reason I don't touch it at all is it was already hard enough in 39 minutes to get someone from zero to understanding the big red button is the issue. This is downstream of the big red button. It doesn't invalidate anything. It's a hidden gem for when people go down the rabbit hole and suddenly realize it's so much worse than how it was presented in the video, and the solution's already very clear. But with fractional reserve banking at the moment, you go to the bank, and the money you're borrowing to buy that house has just been created out of thin air. It's not deposits. It's not fully deposits that other people have put in the bank. It's probably 10% or 5%, or even I think it's 0 in the US now. You can just print money for free. That doesn't exist within Bitcoin because you can't print Bitcoin for free. You have to actually do the work. And so even the ability to get a mortgage to buy a house on leverage becomes challenging because someone else actually has to lend the Bitcoin, and try getting someone to part with their Bitcoin to allow you to buy the house. The rates on that are going to be higher, which means the prices come down. And so Bitcoin is a global free market that's going to reset the price of money for everybody, and then ultimately reset all the asset prices back to where they should be when measured in Bitcoin.
Yeah, we'll see the real interest rates come through, right? I mean, instead of manipulated rates, and they could very well be much higher, I guess.
They probably will be. This is just the way it is. It's the free market. We don't have a free market in money, in the cost of money. And if you don't have the free market in the cost of money, everything is corrupted. Decision making is corrupted. How can you evaluate the merits of any investment of any nature if you don't know what the real risk-free rate is? And the real risk-free rate is the productivity gains that you should be seeing in your purchasing power from just holding Bitcoin. That's it. Right? So why would anyone ever lend you Bitcoin for less than that? They wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so moving to a Bitcoin standard improves the quality of decision making for everybody at every layer of society. And when you do that, the quality of your investments you ultimately make is a lot higher, because you're not funding businesses that are never going to work. You're not funding the long tail of speculative stuff, which is just going to destroy capital. And so your economy overall just becomes a lot fitter, driving more productivity growth for everybody. It's hard to think like that because it's such a foreign world from what we experience, today.
Yeah. Again, fix the money, fix the world. It's just another example. And as you dive deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole, and actually, I think, unfortunately, we've probably reached the end of the rabbit hole here for now because
well, thank you for having me.
It's half past, and unfortunately, we only have the venue to a certain time. But it's so much information there. Yeah, just really, really incredible. I mean, thank you so much for sharing your time. You're an incredible communicator. I feel very blessed to have you with us, and keep doing what you're doing. It's great.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed talking with you, and thank you for the questions, and keep trying to educate people down there. In 5 years' time, you look back and think, God, I can't believe there were only 12 of us in the room when we did this 5 years ago. Everything is going to change. So thank you very much for the invite, Black.
All right, I'll just